I am from Boulder, Colorado, and I decided to do my POL on reflection and kind of the process that I went through on this trip. So as I started on this presentation of learning, like most of us students, I felt lost. I felt completely void of passion, and I did not consider myself an agent of change. I had no topic or experience from the trip that was standing out, so doing a presentation of learning seemed impossible and pointless to me. Starting to think about it, I realized that I was setting an image in my mind of what a presentation of learning was supposed to look like. Once I erased that from my mind, all I had to think about was those expectations that I had set and why I had set them. I create expectations. Whether it is about what my future will hold or how I will react to something, I do create expectations. I often create them in my life, and I'm usually able to keep them in check with keeping reality in mind. With this program, I had so little that I could concretely picture about my coming future that I let my expectations run wild. The program was so grand, exciting, and new. And I had so little to concretely imagine. Coming into the program, I had expectations of what I would get out of it in the end. And surprise, surprise, I wasn't impacted in the same way that I thought I would be. I haven't developed the same strong opinions that I expected to have developed at this point, or the same passion or drive that I thought I would have by now. I think I create these perfect situations in my head with perfect Kaia. In these situations, I set really high expectations for myself, as well as other people, bringing the situations completely out of my control. When they don't turn out the way they did in my head, I get very disappointed, upset, or freaked out. I also set expectations based on other people. For example, in Ecuador, a group of students became very passionate about their culminating environmental unit media project, and the unit as a whole. I felt like the unit should have been pulling me in the same way that it was intriguing them. And when it didn't, it made me frustrated that I wasn't able to connect in the same way. Before I go into it all, I want to clarify. As I see it, hopes and expectations are different than goals. In both goals as well as expectations, you have a target, but the difference is the process. Goals have steps. Goals are something attainable. They're tangible and achievable. Expectations don't have steps behind them. They're nothing that you're in control of. For example, one of my expectations coming into the trip was, the variety of volunteer work will make me think about things in a new way. It's impossible to measure if the variety of volunteer work will actually make me think in a different way. Honestly, I can't look into the future and predict whether or not my thoughts will change. Through this process of looking back, I've realized that education doesn't necessarily develop passion. Before experiencing this trip, I had this idea that if you educated someone about a wrong going on in the world, they would all of a sudden get it, agree, and jump on board. But the reality of it is that even experiencing something might not result in passion. I've experienced amazing, mind-blowing, intense things on this trip. I've created family bonds with indigenous people in Ecuador. I've communicated with my host mom, pretty much only saying, "I'm full" in Mandarin. I've struggled with teaching in India and seen a man only days before he passed away in South Africa. I've seen things that people could only imagine and learned about things in a new way that should be shared. I went through the entire program doing hands-on learning, a work project every day, seminars focusing on different kinds of development every other day, 4 culminating MOOC media projects, and I feel like I kind of failed. Even after all the studying and living we have done, I have nothing. At the beginning of our time in Virginia, I felt so disconnected from my emotions because I wasn't feeling as strongly or as passionately as others were and as I thought I should be. I feel like the point of this trip was to find my passions, to find what I wanted to pursue in college and the rest of my life, to find how I wanted to change the world. But I found nothing of the sort. I cannot answer a single one of those questions. I found myself looking at the presentation of learning guidelines reading. The essential part of this presentation of learning is, how are you an agent of change? I defined a proactive agent of change for myself towards the beginning of the program as someone who takes action to make a difference in the outside world based on his or her beliefs and values. That is to say that to be an agent of change is to reach out to other people in the world to change something they see as needing a change. But how am I to outwardly affect the world with something that is of importance to me if I haven't yet found that something? Even though I didn't find something I'm passionate about like I expected to, I do feel different. I did change. I began to learn and figure out who I am. I learned more about where I stand on issues and in the world. It sure isn't perfect, but progress was made, and that was my experience. As I thought about it more, I realized that the only reason that I had not become an agent of change was because of the definition I had created. The expectation that I would find passion that led me to outwardly affect the world. But what if the definition was different, bigger, not as narrow? My definition focused on reaching outwards, affecting other people, changing outside of me. And as I reflected, I realized the disconnect in how I had changed and grown on this trip, and in my definition. I have changed and learned so much about myself, and that's how I'm an agent of change. Instead of acting outside towards other people, I made change and learned more about myself. The first steps for me to become an agent of change is to clarify my thoughts and figure out who I am, and then make steps to make a difference in what needs changing within myself before I step out onto the bigger picture. I didn't expect to get to this place at the start, but I believe that this reflective state I've come to is much more important than when I were expected to be at the beginning. This is how I see it. Picture me standing on top of a mountain. There are trails heading out from all sides of the mountain, disappearing in the valleys and mountaintops around me. Each trail is a different passion. The wind is blowing in every direction, confusing me and mixing me up. Every time I think I know which trail I'd like to start down, I get jumbled, disordered, and no trail looks especially special to me. But before I start down a trail, I have to get to a point where the wind whipping in my face and swirling around me doesn't get my mind racing and muddled. I need to take a deep breath and think, figure out where I am, which mountain I'm standing on, and which trail is the right one for me to start down. I need to orient myself, figure out which way is north, south, east, and west. The program has been me taking that breath. On this trip, the wind died down as I started to figure out who I am and where I stand. But this breath and this program aren't the end. The only way I will figure out where I stand is with more experience and more time to find out what I'm passionate about, so that I can start down a trail. Once I know who I am, I can figure out how I have changed and how I'd like to change in the future. I don't believe that I personally can have direction and purpose in the world if I'm not sure who I am, the change I need to make in myself and what I believe. I think self-reflection is something that's crucial to all of us, something all of us should take the time to do. And before this trip, I had never taken time to self-reflect. My life was always going, and it never crossed my mind that I needed to slow down and take Kaia time. Even when I did have free time, it would be taken up with watching TV or texting the friends I had just seen hours before. The only time I was forced to sit and reflect was Quaker meeting. Every Sunday, my mom and I would go. If you don't know how it works, in Quaker meeting, you sit in silence and anyone can stand up and speak if they feel moved to do so. So as you can imagine, it's a lot of sitting in silence, and it is something I dreaded. I wrote myself off even when I did go, and instead of looking inward and using the time, I would count how many people wore glasses, how many had gray hair, how many were wearing sandals. I have the floor patterns memorized, and I know how many fire alarms are in the room. Why didn't I use this time that was cut out for me to take time for myself? I think that I avoided looking inside until I had to. In China, I was alone most of the time. My host mom worked hours upon hours at the farm, my host dad worked in the city, and my host sister went to boarding school a few towns away. I would go home and read and journal and sit and stretch and repeat. Sometimes I would take long walks through the narrow village streets to kill time before dinner. I've never been forced to think, contemplate my emotions, be quiet, or really just not interact with others for so long before. At the beginning of the trip, I hated being alone. Truthfully, I still don't love it, but I know how to. China was the first place that I started self-reflecting. Not only would I spend a lot of time alone, but I would also walk with my host mom to the farm in the mornings, and Chris, one of my PLs, would take me out to the farm where he would talk me through a meditation. They were hard. Even at 7 in the morning, my mind would be racing and busy. It was a challenge to try and control all of the thoughts inside of my head. Trying to meditate, I would get so frustrated that I kept thinking things and following those thoughts that nothing came of it. I stopped wanting to try it altogether. But by India, Vanessa and I were trying to meet every day to do a quick, simple 15 minutes of silence. I think that in those 15 minutes, I would get the most self-reflective. In our silence times, I would focus on my emotions and why I was feeling the way I was. Another important way I began to think inwardly was through journaling. Reading back through my journal this week, I realized that all through Ecuador, my journal was full of events and what we would do during the day, what we ate for dinner. It was pretty boring. Work, seminar, yuca, pasta, rice, banana. Once I had all this extra time to journal in China, I began writing about emotions. Not only about what was going on around me, but also how I was feeling, what I was thinking. In the moment, none of it seemed special or different to me, just extreme boredom acting up. So I'd write whatever came to mind. But by the time we got to South Africa a few months ago, what I did during the day didn't even make it into the pages of my journal. I would write in my journal when I was feeling emotionally unstable, when I had to work something out in my head, or when what we were learning and what I was seeing were lining up, or weren't lining up. Less obvious ways I began to focus inward was through our seminars. Although we would always be talking about the outside world, what was going on in the country we were in or in the United States, all discussions we had related back to us. It was India that I really began to relate what we were learning to me. Instead of asking more outward-directed questions, I started focusing my questions inward, questioning myself about my assumptions on education and what it means to me, relating what we were learning to my educational past and future. Finding this self-reflection was nothing like what I expected out of this trip. It is so much more valuable to me than the ways that I thought I would change. But it isn't only there for that. Through the self-reflection that I've done, I can begin to work on myself and make change within myself. One thing I know I will work on is my expectations. I need to learn to control them, because on this trip I have learned how negative they can be for me. These expectations that I have are so closely tied in with the emotions. They define how I feel about situations. High expectation can make awesome experiences dissatisfying and upsetting. And low expectations, if it turns out better than you assumed, can create happy emotions. But isn't it better to just live in the moment and feel how you feel in that instant? For now, I think I need to work on limiting my expectations through my reflection, so that I can begin to experience life with emotions from that second, not just the emotions resulting from my hopes. Hopefully, this beginning of inwardly directed thought will lead to more growth, more understanding. So as much as it is a challenge to me, I will keep taking time for myself. To become an agent of change, I believe that the first step is to look inside. The next step might be to make a difference outside of myself, but it might not. To me, it is just as valuable to change myself as it is to change others. And who knows? Maybe I try a trail or two and ended up at a dead end in the middle of the jungle, and I have to start over. Maybe the trail is just one big loop and leads right back to the top of the mountain. Maybe none of the trails fit, so I grab my pickaxe and shovel and start my own trail. Maybe the trail I take doesn't even lead to the outside world, instead continuing to focus inward, and that's okay.